People make mistakes. We've made a lot of them over the last 10 years growing pepper plants. But in this video, I want to share a mistake that 99.67% of pepper growers make at some point in their gardening career. This one mistake keeps plaguing me, and right now in spring, this is the biggest pepper plant that we currently have. Grew it over the winter just for fun, and it's currently suffering from this mistake, meaning I'm still making it. I still fall victim to this one mistake. And I want to start this off with a little story. Some of you may remember a couple years ago, we ran a little friendly competition to see who could grow the largest Dorset Naga pepper plant between us and Chili Chump, and of course we invited you to join along. Long story short, we lost the competition, but still grew a really impressive plant in my eyes. We grew 400+ peppers on a single plant. But what not many of you knew is that we actually had 2 plants going into that competition. One of them was grown in the large half barrel that you see in those videos, but the other was grown in a self-watering container, a little bit smaller, but it had a unique way of delivering water, and that plant was growing so well. It was so healthy, big and strong. But in the middle of the summer, we had a huge storm come along, and the wind gusts were huge, over 30 miles an hour. And I went out in the morning and the plant had broken off at its stem. I did have a pretty strong stake helping to support that plant right in the middle, put that in there on day 1, but it just wasn't enough for how quickly that plant grew and how heavy it had become by that point in time. So at that point, I was down to just 1 plant to get me through that competition, and I quickly made some adjustments to help support what I had left. And if you haven't already figured it out, the mistake I'm talking about here is properly supporting your pepper plants. So in this video now, I want to talk about 4 of the options that you have, and there are many different ways to help support your plants, but I'm going to go over 4 of the basic options you have, from the simplest to the most complex and best option that you have. So let's start with this beautiful little cute plant I have here. Like I said, I can forgive myself for this one since it was grown indoors. We don't have wind, we don't have storms in our basement. But the problem here is that I have this tiny little popsicle stick, basically, of a stake supporting the plant. I put that in there when this plant was much smaller, and it was enough. But now it's grown a little bit more heavy. You see all of these fruits growing on it, and it's very wobbly. I'm a little nervous having it outside right now. And basically all this needs is a stronger stake. It needs to be at least the same width as the stem of the plant. Otherwise, you may run into issues where the plant isn't actually supported and a gust of wind can just knock it over, completely ruining your harvest. I'm actually going to bring this indoors. The plant's back inside, back to safety. It did its part in this video. So the first thing you can do is just provide a stake. This is the simplest option. There are so many different stakes that you can buy. You can go into the woods and find a stick, shave off the branches on the sides, and just use that as a stake. There's really no excuse to not using at least a stake early on in the season. Right when you transplant, just pop the stake an inch or 2 away from the main stem. And you don't even have to attach the plant to the stake, especially if you're growing in ground where the plants will be sort of supporting one another. If you space them properly, maybe 12 to 18 inches apart, those plants will support one another as they grow larger. And the stakes, along with the natural support of the surrounding plants, should be enough to keep them upright. If you have really fertile soil or a really long growing season and you expect your plants to get very large, then I'd recommend a nice thick wooden stake alongside each plant. 1.5 to 2 inches thick is ideal, and drive it nice and deep into the ground so that it's nice and sturdy. A quick tip, if you do plan on attaching the plant to the stake, which we do, make sure that it's a nice loose attachment. You don't want the plant cinched right up against the stake. Make sure there's some wiggle room so that the plant can sway a bit, but also so it can continue to grow within the confines of that space. The second option is some form of cage, and you can find these in various sizes. I have this miniature one here, which isn't large enough for this 10-gallon growing bag here, but it would help, at least, in addition to a stake. It's nice to have these tomato cages, which I consider to be more pepper cages. Cages are a great option, especially if you're growing in small to medium containers, maybe up to 10 gallons. A tomato cage is perfectly suitable to grow even heavy plants like bell peppers. You'll hear people talking about how cheap these are and overpriced, and unfortunately, that is true. This probably costs $6 or $7 for this flimsy little piece of metal. There are better options out there if you're growing at scale, but if you have just a few plants, this is definitely better than nothing. Now, quick tip on cages, make sure that you get one that is suited to the size of your pot. You want to make sure that it can fit inside of the pot. Some are a bit wider than others, some are deeper, taller, but also it's really important that you do this at the beginning of the season. Once the plant has grown outdoors for maybe a month or so, you're probably not going to be able to fit this around your pepper plant anymore, so do it right when you transplant into your containers or into the ground, and your plant can grow up and through all of these holes throughout the year. All right, quick change of scenery here to our raised garden beds. This is our trellis support system here. The trellis netting has since passed and we have to replace it, but a trellis is perfectly usable if you're growing in ground. Since peppers are relatively tall plants, they can grow pretty high up a trellising system, and this might not be ideal because we have it at the back of our garden beds, but if you're growing in the ground, a simple trellis like this with your plants planted right at the base of the trellis, right in the middle of this center post, you can keep them upright by tying it along the trellis as they grow larger and larger. Again, keeping those tying points nice and loose so that they can move around a little bit. And really one of the benefits of growing up a trellis with any plant is to save space in the garden. So you can actually plant your peppers a little bit closer if you're growing up a trellis. They'll tend to be narrower plants, but they'll grow taller. You see this when they grow bell peppers in greenhouse settings. They'll grow them up a trellis, and usually they're about 12 inches apart from one another, and the plants grow really tall but not all that wide. But again, you really need to make sure it's nice and sturdy. I have these 2x4s here, and even this with a lot of plants on it can become a little bit heavy, so you want to make sure that this is nice and reinforced and can support the weight of all your pepper plants and their peppers later in the summer. And the last option I want to talk about is custom cages. You can see this is much wider than anything you can buy from the store to support your plants. And while this isn't really the most impressive option, it really has done an amazing job to support some really big plants over the seasons. This is where we grew that Dorset Naga that had over 400 peppers on it. And this is similar to what we had going on to support the plant. We have 3 stakes. You could do 4 in a large container, and some string going around the edges, basically making our own larger tomato cage with some simple materials. Now there are of course some much more advanced ways of basically doing the same thing. You can use different types of fencing, ideally ones where you can reach through and harvest your peppers when the time comes. It takes more time and it's going to be a little more costly, but if you're growing at any sort of scale, if you have dozens and dozens or hundreds of pepper plants in containers, then it might be worth the investment of a nice big roll of that type of fencing. So if you're going to take one thing away from this video, it's go in the woods and find a stick and put it next to your plants at the beginning of the season. If you've done nothing before this, then that will be an improvement, and it will likely save you a lot of peppers in the end. But if you're like me, it's going to take you a few years to step up and actually commit to supporting your plants. And that's okay too. Some of us just need to learn the lesson ourselves the hard way. I hope you're having a beautiful start to this growing season. It's going to be a little different for us this year since we had our first baby and we've got our hands full there, but I've got some really fun projects planned for this season, and I'm more excited, I think, than I've ever been. So hopefully you're looking forward to some long form videos later in the year. A couple of quick things before you go. Our hot sauce is back in stock. It did sell out briefly there, but we have it back in stock. If you've been thinking about trying it, now's a good time to do so. I'll leave a link to it down below. And spring is a great time to pick up our ebook about growing peppers. It's called Growing Perfect Peppers, and it basically details our entire growing process from start to finish, including supporting our pepper plants. Even though we haven't always been perfect with that, we definitely have always recommended it. If you have a unique way of supporting your pepper plants that works really well for you, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments below, and I'm sure everyone else would as well. So thanks for sharing and watching, and I'll see you in the next video.